Hello, hi there. My name is Beth Spotswood. I am Alta Journal's digital editor, and I am just really excited to welcome you all to episode 31 of Alta Asks Live, our digital event series at altaonline.com. Today, I am really excited to welcome writer and Alta contributor Keenan Norris. Keenan wrote, among several books and tons of exciting work, he wrote One Coyote, a short story about a boy's coming of age in California's Inland Empire. And you can read that story in the current issue of Alta Journal, or by clicking on the link below. We've got a link right to that, an online version of that story directly below. Keenan's going to be in conversation today with noted author, educated Alta contributor, and just a friend of Alta, Susan Straight. Their chat's going to last about 25 minutes. I'm going to then pop back in and ask any questions you have for either Keenan or Susan. You can use the chat feature over on the side. I also love that everyone's checking in with where they're from. I'm here in Novato, California, in Marin County today. So please let us know where you're viewing from. And at 12:55 or so, I'm going to pop back in and we're going to get to as many questions of yours as we can. If you miss any part of this conversation, we will have it up on altaonline.com later this afternoon. I definitely wanted to let you know about Alta, this great quarterly journal we have. We have a website. We have the speaker series. We also have a Clubhouse, an interactive place where members can kind of collect as a community. And we have the California Book Club. You can visit californiabookclub.com for more information on that. Our next author is Reina Grande. So I'll leave you to, I'll post the links to that in the chat, but please do kind of check out the offerings from Alta. Without any further ado from me, I'd like to turn it over to Keenan and Susan.
Thanks, Beth. Can everybody hear me? Is that okay? Keenan, we're good, right?
Yes, we are.
All right. It is nice to see everybody weighing in. Look, we've got Sacramento, Oakland, San Jose, Mountain View, LA. Our lovely friend Olivia is checking in from LA. And Allison Hedgecoke, who is my neighbor in Riverside, where I am, but she's in Hawaii right now. And we will keep seeing where everybody's from. But it's perfect to see all these different places in California checking in, because you know how long we've known each other, and that's what I'm excited to talk about, is that I want to talk about our California, where, you know, the place that it feels like we were put on earth to write about. And if anybody doesn't know me, I've been writing since I was 16 at Riverside City College. I published my first book in 1990. Yeah, 30 years ago. That's embarrassing, but not really. Aqua Boogie, and it was set in a fictional Riverside called Rio Seco. But there's always a lot of San Bernardino in my work, of course, because I have family in San Bernardino and grew up right on the Riverside-San Bernardino border. So Keenan, were you 17 when you were in my class?
I was 18.
You were 18. When's your birthday?
May 12th.
Oh, okay. So it was my thinking. So my birthday is October. So I was 17 when I went off to college. And my parents dropped me off in the yellow pickup truck at USC. And then I didn't see them for a while. And they gave away my room within like 10 minutes and threw away all my stuff. So you, however, were an only child and you were 18. But this is a great California story that we have not ever gotten to share in public, Keenan. But Gary Soto came to me. Gary Soto was teaching with me back then at UCR. He flew down during the week and stayed for 2 days. And we became really good friends. And he came to me one day and said, there's this kid in my class named Keenan Norris, and you have to take him in your workshop. He's a genius. He's the best writer I've seen in years, and he's going to be big. And I remember thinking, like, okay, where's he from? And he's like, he's from San Bernardino. And I was just like, what? So you showed up at 18 and you started writing indelible paragraphs about kids holding up fleas to stove burners in order to kill them, and kids walking down streets in Highland. So that's my opening, is to say it was really that long ago. And tell me what you can tell our viewers about your San Bernardino and Highland.
Yeah, so my parents bought their first house in Rialto, California, which sits on, the other side of San Bernardino. And then their second house in Highland, California, which sits on the opposite side. And right between them, San Bernardino, downtown San Bernardino on East Street became like, it's like this, people from big cities look at it like this dusty little town or whatever, but it was the nexus of my, my imagination and my, my formative years. My dad was a rehabilitation counselor for the county on one side of the street. There were Black barbershops on either side of the same street on either side of East Street. One was the, like Christian barbershop where they played gospel music and everybody wore suits and everybody was on time. The other side was the heathen barbershop. Nobody was on time and kind of smelled like weed. And it was, and both of them were fun. And then right next to the barbershops was the Black bookstore, Phoenix Books, run by Farron Roberts. Was one of my early mentors who brought Toni Morrison and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Omar Tyree to San Bernardino. And the Carousel Mall was there. And so, so there's just, for somebody growing up, as a writer, you don't need skyscrapers and, trips around the world. You need a space to, for your mind to wander. And so.
I think that's a perfect way to start, because for me, San Bernardino is the place where my mom had to work when she first came to this country. She was 19 when she came here, and her family was living in a trailer park in Fontana. And my grandmother was a head nurse for Kaiser Steel, which was Kaiser Permanente. She was the oldest living Kaiser patient when she died at 96. But my mom wouldn't spend 2 nights in that trailer park. So she told me this last week, the night of the World Series. She was reminding me that she rented a room on 7th Street in Riverside, but her first job was in San Bernardino off 5th Street. And that was rough. It was rough, boy. And she was 4'11". So I have to tell this story, which I've never told anyone. She then got a job. She was 21 years old, 22. She got a job at Glendale Federal Credit Union on Baseline and Mount Vernon. Now, you and I both know what Baseline and Mount Vernon means. That is a super rough area. And her first clients were women walking the streets. And my mom would go out there with her Swiss self and say, I want you to save money. Don't give it to that pimp. She was fearless. She was crazy. And a week after she started, she drove in and found a dead girl in the parking lot at the dumpster, left on a piece of cardboard. And my mom only told me that story really to tell me how dangerous the world was, not how dangerous San Bernardino was. So I find it fascinating that we both remember such vivid things. You remember the barbershop and the smell, and I remember going to see where my mom worked in San Bernardino. But what makes us fiction writers, don't you think, is that same thing that Toni Morrison had, where we were like, this is my place, and I want to represent how people talk and how they look, and like what kind of earrings they wore and what the barbershop smelled like. Like, how do you think you got that, Keenan? Where did that come from in you?
I think that I was interested in writing about a place that had not been, chronicled very much in literature. I remember talking to you and kind of becoming aware of how little, written about it. I didn't know. And so I think it was that there was like an excitement in writing about. Once I became aware that not many people had written about it, I realized that I would have some kind of definitional, power there to write about this place. I also, was kind of inspired by writers like Toni Morrison, by Faulkner, who had taken these little strips of land in otherwise, places that the historical record would have passed over. If not for their contribution, and illumined it and showed all the different kinds of people that live there. I think that the Inland Empire in general is oftentimes considered just sort of like this adjunct to Los Angeles, and just kind of this just this lesser version of Los Angeles, and that's completely incorrect. It has its own culture. The IE does. It has its own weather. It's got, it's just its own particular place. And everybody in the IE and everybody out in LA knows that. We're not from either, don't know that. So,
well, that's why we get along so well, because I remember thinking that for writers like us, it's people like Ernest J. Gaines, Toni Morrison, Flannery O'Connor, Eudora Welty. Also, I think often of Steinbeck, where it's the valley. I've been rereading Steinbeck because someone left it on my fence library. And you read those stories of that hidden valley that Steinbeck writes about, where everyone knew each other. But that particular valley has its own sort of history and legacy and ancestry. And then our valleys, the San Bernardino Valley, and then Riverside, we have the Santa Ana River flowing through. And being from Highland, which is close to San Manuel, Highland has its own different feeling altogether, where you're close to the mountains and Cajon Pass. So I found it fascinating that that's what you chose to write about. And as you said, I think both of us felt like these were places that are not exurbs, even though that's a word that I just read in the New York Times the other day. Someone was writing about a brand new book, and they were like, in the Inland Empire, the dusty exurbs of Los Angeles. If you told that to the older Black people that we knew,
right.
My, Daisy, who's a heroine of my memoir, In the Country of Women, Daisy married a man named Aaron Carter. She was his third wife, and he was the first Black man to carry a gun on the railroad. He lived in San Bernardino. He came from Dallas and settled in San Bernardino. He was a towering figure in San Bernardino. And so I often think that's what you and I are trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback off of that, like I said, my parents bought their first house in Rialto, their second house in Highland. They sold the first house, they didn't have to. We're not balling like that, but but it, that was a huge deal for us. My parents had come from really difficult circumstances. And their parents had come from the segregated South and the plantations. And so it was, very, it was just very difficult and a great accomplishment for us to move out to the IE, own a home. And that, and then when I learned more, what other people from maybe other places, thought about the IE, it kind of jarred me because it had been such a great accomplishment.
Yeah. It's true. People left LA and other places because they wanted a piece of land. And that actually brings me to your first novel, which was published by Heyday Press, one of my favorite presses. So California. I just was in touch with them this week. Brother and the Dancer, your first book, was published in 2013, and it was a winner of the James Houston Prize for Fiction. And in Brother and the Dancer, you were writing about these two young people who are navigating being that second generation, like you were. So their parents considered it a great accomplishment and a great joy to have a place in the IE. What about your two characters in Brother and the Dancer?
Yeah. And here's the book for folks. So the book is organized around this boy and this girl, Toussaint and Erica, who meet at their, college orientation. They find out they're both from Highland. They're two of the only Black kids at the orientation. And, over the course of their day together, they realize they actually hate each other. The story then cycles back when they're 6 years old, tells their stories in alternating chapters to explain how they got to be so different. And even in a place as small as Highland, if you go on Wikipedia, I think there are 40 or 50,000 people in Highland, which I've been told by people from the Midwest is not a small town.
Yeah.
But I think it's, kind of small. But, it's separated by a freeway. And West Highland and East Highland are dramatically different economically and, in a lot of other ways. And so Erica is from West Highland. She's from the hood. And Toussaint is from East Highland, and he's from a suburb,
Right.
the kind of place that, you know, I described in the One Coyote essay that I published Alta. So.
That's exactly, you know, again, we know each other so well. It's funny after all these years when you came over this spring and we got to sit together and talk. That's exactly what I was going to segue into, is that your piece in Alta was great because it's that hidden racism that just jumps out to the front, which actually America's dealing with now. But if you were a young Black kid growing up anywhere in America, but especially in a place like the IE, you had all these layers. Like, I mean, my friends, their great-great-great-grandparents came, you know, from Mexico in 1842. So like, to be in Riverside and hanging out with all of my family, you are insulated from that in some ways. But the character in One Coyote is not insulated because he moves to East Highland. And how did that feel, that story? It's got a lot of tension.
Yeah. I mean, it's based on personal experience, like that happened. So, yeah, I mean, we moved to East Highland, which, like, when we moved to Rialto, like, our whole neighborhood, you know, was Black. One white dude who lived next door to us, who had a boat in his backyard for some reason, was like knocking down our fence for 2 years. You know, but other than that, you know, everybody else in the neighborhood was Black. When we moved to East Highland, it was much more diverse, and there were a lot more white folks, and most of them were in the same position that we were, you know, just like moving into this neighborhood to like live in a nice suburb. But yeah, there's that cat with the gray house and the Confederate flag, and it definitely there is just that element of like just recalcitrant, just like recalcitrant rednecks. I mean, honestly, right. And so, you know, he just took it upon himself to harass us, you know, as Black kids, and that eventually, my friends who were like, I don't think it's in the article, but who were, you know, from South Central, they, you know, just were like, what the hell is, you know, going on here? This, you know, this man's calling us all these names and everything. And, you know, I think that there is that feeling like we had, or, you know, our parents worked so hard to, you know, come to this place that was safer than all the places we were from. Right. That was, you know, just better, you know, nicer in all these ways. And we're meeting with this really severe racism, you know, just from jump. It was pretty jarring, pretty terrible.
I think what I love so much about Alta's willingness to publish fiction like this too, because I wrote a story set in Rialto, which was about a master butcher from Stater Brothers. And that was a very IE story. And Blaze, who's listening now, was my editor. And it was such a joy to write about my place and to not have anybody question it. How many times, Keenan, have we sent stuff out? You and me, Alex Espinosa, Michael Jaime Becerra, you know, we the four compadres, and someone's question like, well, what kind of Spanish is it? You know, I'll never forget my first book. I sent it off and the copy edit came back and they're like, it should say que pasa. And I'm like, nobody says que pasa in my neighborhood. They say que paes. And no one says si for yes. They say Simón que si, that's just a whole different way to say yes in Spanish, which is very SoCal. So I love that One Coyote to me represents this absolutely perfect evocation of that place and that time. Fiction allows us to do that, right? And so your next book, Brother and the Dancer, I mean, after Brother and the Dancer was Under the Lemon Tree, and that was published by Goliad. And I like this idea that you've been publishing with medium-sized and independent presses. So you went from Heyday to Goliad, and then we'll talk about the other works too. But can you talk about that?
Yeah, definitely. So Heyday,
I mean, by the Lemon Tree, not Under the Lemon Tree. Sorry.
But so Brother and Dancer is published with Heyday, which is, as you said, a California. You know, all their literature is, you know, it's California based. Right. Then I published by the Lemon Tree actually with Nomadic Press, which is
oh, that's right.
Yes, dually based in Oakland and Brooklyn. And And so they're a really cool publisher. They mostly do poetry, but they do chapbooks and like 1 or 2 novels a year. So they're small press, but
I don't know where I got Goliath. I don't know why that was in my head.
Well, no, it's because I had my the novella Luster that I'm
Goliath.
Yeah, they're going to publish Luster, but then because of pandemic related financial issues, that didn't happen this year.
Okay.
Nomadic will publish Nomadic published by Lemon Tree. They're also going to publish Luster, the novella, next year.
Okay.
So yeah, but they're all they all fit into this space of the small press, and I think that small presses are really what would I say? I mean, they're really integral to the development of writers like myself who might be writing about places that are not on the literary map, that aren't like highly regarded, that aren't LA, New York, San Francisco, London, etc. And so Nomadic, for example, being based in these 2 second cities, Oakland and Brooklyn, to me, sort of like emblematic of that. But there are great small presses all over Southern California now, in and around Los Angeles, and all over the country. And can I say this too? I also like the fact that, for example, with Nomadic, their willingness to publish types of books that are not just like a novel, but might be a chapbook, might be these different forms is great too, because it allows people to publish without like falling into the exact like mainstream.
Exactly. Well, it's a funny circle, and this is not something that anybody else might say, but in my obsession, how much I read, and I read, my favorite thing is regional literature. Like one of the most beautiful Flannery O'Connor quotes is, all the best literature is regional. And so look at how many different writers we've brought up. But I don't think of you and I as regional writers. I don't think of us as regional writers. I think of us as writing the great California novel, which could be the great American novel. Why can't it? And when people bring up Steinbeck and Didion, and they bring up Chandler and Ross MacDonald, he's actually my favorite of the noir. I think that what we're doing, like you said, a lot of the LA writers, but also you've got great writers out of Oakland. Jess Mowry, a big favorite of mine from back in the day. Used to love assigning Jess Mowry, probably to you. I'm going to go back to Gary Soto. To me, a lot of my friends from back in the day, Luis Rodriguez, Gary Soto, Elena Maria Viramontes, just all of these great writers that were a little tiny bit older than me. Gary Soto published the Chicano chapbook series when he taught at UCR. He published Michael Jaime Becerra first as a poet. He published Alex Espinosa, Jesus Stole My Bike. I still have all of those. I have them right here in my office, because for me, is that people always say as well, oh my gosh, that's so nice you teach. I write full time. Well, I don't know what you think I'm doing. I have 3 kids and I teach and I write, and it's all interconnected with us wanting to give voice. And you teach now. You've been, tenure track, and that makes me really happy.
Yeah. In fact, one of my students, one of my very favorite students is, in the audience here, Derek. What's up? Derek was my student when I taught at the community college level at Evergreen Valley College in San Jose, California. But I've taught at community colleges all over the state, and probably like more than 10 community colleges. Now I'm a tenure track, and I taught both part-time and full-time at community college level. Now I'm tenure track, at San Jose State, and that's it's been really interesting to move on to the 4-year level and to get to introduce students to a wider range of literature, and have like more freedom around what I'm able to teach.
I like that we're nurturing the next generation. I mean, it doesn't even make me feel old to say that, because I think of the people who nurtured me at Riverside City College when I was 15 and 16 and writing my very first fiction. Didn't know anything, you know, all my friends were drug dealers. And I show up in a creative writing class in summer school and I get someone who says, you should be a writer. And that's what our job is now. And it makes me happy. It's almost time to turn it back to Beth for questions, but I do want to say on the side there, Blaze is suggesting, how about nomadic press and nomadic coffee, publishing poetry and inserting the poetry inside coffee bags. Okay, Blaze. I'll let Keenan take that idea to them, but it's actually pretty funny. Okay. Beth is going to come back on in a few minutes, and we're going to do questions from the audience. But it is there's nothing like Alta and Heyday and your new book coming out from Unnamed. Just this really strong vision of California today, especially. I wanted to say before we get to questions, you know, and everyone's like, oh, it doesn't matter what California votes. It doesn't matter what we do. You know, California is a separate nation. We're the 5th largest economy in the world, okay? And where Keenan is from and where I still live, we're like the warehouse capital of the world. We're the hardworking inland empire where all the stuff that everybody's buying is coming through warehouses and being trucked by my neighbors. My neighbor Jose stopped by last night. He works at Cisco warehouse in the day and Petco at night. That's a tired man, and he can barely lift his arms. But a shout out to all of our IE people, right, Keenan, who my friends and family who've all been exposed to COVID and who are working so hard day and night, driving trucks and being at warehouses. That's something that I think people forget exists in a place like California too, is all the bounty of the people working in the Coachella Valley, all the people picking pistachios and grapes, all the people packing them. So I like giving that shout out because Keenan's got that in his writing too, and so do I. Yeah,
definitely. If I could just real quick, yeah, I mean, my mother is from the Central Valley and you know, grew up you know, doing, you know, working in the fields and so forth, and it you know, and so yeah, I mean, that's part of our backgrounds as well. The part of the kind of the oftentimes unspoken or unremarked upon, uncelebrated, you know, labor of California. Yeah. So
my mom too, when she first was 15 or between 14 and 16, she picked corn and strawberries, and it means something to come from people who teach us then how important it is to either grow your own food or be able to do hard manual labor. My face might look okay, but my hands definitely look like a farmer's. So Beth, she's going to tell us what questions we've got.
That was great. Thank you guys. That was a fabulous conversation. I do have a bunch of questions. We're going to try and get to some of them. First of all, Keenan, we know you have 3 books under contract. Can you tell us a little bit about each of those? What we can look forward to?
Yeah, and the first is going to be the Confession of Copeland Cane, which will be published by Unnamed Press in June of next year. Unnamed Press is another one of those presses in LA, and so I'm really looking forward to that book coming out. Yeah, that book takes place in a future Oakland about 10 years ahead of where we're at right now. And, involves, it's about a kid whose childhood friend is shot and killed by a police officer who helps to organize a rally to protest the killing. A police officer is shot at the rally. All the other organizers are arrested. He is a fugitive, and he contacts a journalist to tell his story. The reason he does that is because law enforcement has started to publish his juvenile criminal record, which is illegal. Those things are supposed to be sealed, but it happens all the time. And so he decides that he needs to tell his story, right? Instead of letting other people talk about him. So there's that. There's that book. The novella that I mentioned, Lester, is going to come out like early 2022 from Nomadic Press. That is about a couple things, but it's about an ex-convict who comes back to Highland San Bernardino area and is remaking his life. And then this young boy, Lester, who is kind of comes under his wing. It's kind of this wayward child who comes under his wing, and their relationship. I also just always liked the idea of, a character named Lester in a book called Lester, because I got it from Faulkner. And I always loved that this white man who had died before, 30 years before I was born, 20 years before I was born, could come up with the blackest name for a character that I had never heard an actual black person named, right? And so I was just like, this is too good. For those who don't know, Lester is the kind of mischievous kid in The Sound and the Fury. And then the third book is a nonfiction book that is under contract with Ohio State Press. That is called Chicago Not Fit to Print. At some point, I actually have to finish writing all these books, so that'll probably come out in 2022 at some point. On my dad's side, they're from Chicago, they're from the South, but came from Alabama and Mississippi up to the west side of Chicago after World War II. And so it's about the Great Migration. It's about, it's about those two generations of, Black folks who were, migrating across the country, and in many ways looking for the same things we were looking for when we came to California 30 years later.
As we run a little bit over, why don't we end with a question for both of you? Can each of you recommend books or writers about the Inland Empire that we should know about, that we should check out if we want to explore the region through someone else's literature?
Well, one of my former students, John Espinosa, is a great poet from Coachella, and he's going to have a poem in Alta in January. I really love him. Alicia Mosley, another one of my former students who's from here in Riverside, she's working on an essay. In terms of books, what's fascinating, Keenan, is there's me. We always talk about this. There's Deneen, right? And there's Janoyne Adams. I'm thinking of Deneen. She writes for Inlandia, but there's also there's Janoyne. There's this place that's between Riverside and San Bernardino that Alex Espinosa writes about, the fictional Agua Mansa, which is in Colton. Right. And then my friend Marissa Silver doesn't always write about the IE, but I really still loved her book called The God of War, which was set in the Coachella Valley at the Salton Sea. That came out some time ago. And so I'd recommend that one. And then, Michael Jaime's, some of his stuff is set sort of in Chino. That's mine. Keenan, what about you?
Yeah, a few books that I want to name check. First of all, a book that just came out a few months ago, an anthology of San Bernardino literature, San Bernardino Singing, which is edited by Nakia Cheney, who is a wonderful poet based in San Bernardino. The Alex Espinosa's books, starting with Stillwater Saints back in the day, and then I also need to speak to Susan's books. Many ways, Susan was the best creative writing teacher I ever had, and her books starting with Aqua Boogie. I mentioned in the print interview that another of your books that I really love is The Gettin' Place, because because that book kind of brings together, or draws this parallel between the Tulsa Massacre, which members of my family survived and escaped, and part of the reason, part of how they came to California, and the Los Angeles, riots, rebellion, whatever, in the 1990s, some 70 years later. So, I think that, all your, books set in Rio Seco. And so, those are just a few.
Well, interestingly enough, because Beth knows this, I had never published nonfiction until the memoir that came out last year, and came out in paperback just a couple months ago. But yeah, Dwayne and I, the day after we were married, my husband and I was 22, we drove to Tulsa, and we spent the night, 3 nights in Tulsa. And Aunt Moselle and Uncle Lanier, this was his father's uncle, they survived the Tulsa riot. She had her first baby in a car on the side of the road at 17, the night of the Tulsa riot. And so that was the beginning of that book. The Getting Place was that particular story. And I got to end with this, Beth. When I graduated and got my MFA, I could not get a job. I was 23. Dwayne was a custodian at Riverside City College. I worked at the Inland Empire Job Corps, which is in Muscoy. Now that's the place in San Bernardino that only Keenan and I are going to know about. Maybe somebody else, if you know where Muscoy is on the chat and you check in, I'll send you my book, man, because Muscoy does not play. And I worked in Muscoy. I drove there every morning, and I had students who were from Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, South Central LA, Oakland, San Francisco, Coachella. But my 2 Cambodian students, Panara Prak, and I'll never forget them, Panara Prak and Samana Som, they told me the stories of what it was like to be 10 years old and living under Pol Pot and seeing people killed. And they were mixing with the Black and Mexican American and white kids at Inland Empire Job Corps. And that was the beginning of the Getting Place, with surviving massacres in Cambodia, surviving massacres in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and being in the Inland Empire. So it's nice of you to bring it up. Those stories that we hear, writers like us and writers like your student, Derek, and everyone else who's listening, you feel that story in a certain part of your brain, in your cortex, and you remember all the things the person told you, and then you try to translate it into fiction. I can't think of luckier people than us. So.
Well, that's nice. And Derek, wherever you are, those were a lot of shout outs. So if you have pitches for Alta, you come highly recommended. Please reach out. letters@altaonline.com. All right. So folks, thank you so much to everyone for joining us. Again, if you were late to the party, I'm going to upload this on altaonline.com just as soon as I can. Please join us next week. We're going to do a big switch in topic direction. We'll have Eddie Muller, the Czar of Noir, join us. He's an author. He hosts Noir Alley on Turner Classic Movies. He's a total noir character and really fun. That's Wednesday, November 11th here at 12:30. Again, you can read Keenan's stories, Susan's work coming up, and we've got a lot of great content at Alta, and you can find it all at altaonline.com. A big thank you to our good friend, Susan's great. Thank you so much. And Keenan, thank you guys, especially today after Election Day. It's been a doozy of a week and will continue to be one, but this was a welcome break, I think, for everyone. So I'm really grateful to you guys. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. It was fun. Bye.